Hi. Hi, hello, my name is Allie, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, what it's costing me. And today I'm coming to you from just outside Toronto with my Baymax mug, which if you haven't seen Big Hero 6, you should really fix that. It's real good. It also has a little piece of tape on the back from like when he has to repair himself. Very cute. I also have to show you the other great part of this mug. Can I do this without spilling tea? This is a fun game. There's little faces on the inside that show like what your mood is based on, based on how much of it you've drank, and you get happier as it goes down. See, isn't it so cute? Watch Big Hero 6. Today in my Baymax mug, we are branching out for possibly the first time ever on the channel, not drinking Earl Grey. Today I am drinking Orange Passion from the Social Tea and Coffee Co., which is in Richmond Hill. And Copper's joining us. Hello! Would you like to sit so you're actually in frame? Oh, you're gonna climb. Okay. Hi. Hi, hello. Hi, Copper and I are coming to you from just outside Toronto. I'm so sorry I left him out. Okay, now as far as what I'm wearing today, like the great Lizzie McGuire, I'm officially an outfit repeater because I have run out of knits to wear on this channel. So this is once again my squiggle sweater. This is based off of Amy Herzog's basic pullover set in construction pattern, but it is a self-drafted chart. Now, is it a self-designed chart? I would say no. It is a dupe of a design by And Other Stories, who made a sweater that looks basically like this that I've been trying to buy on the secondhand market for years and failed time and time again to find it. So when I eventually learned how to knit, I was like, hey, there's a really expensive and complicated way to solve that problem. Let's do it. So I used Amy Herzog's pattern to basically create a blank chart that I then did my best to replicate the sort of squiggle pattern onto and then knit from that. Now this Amy Herzog pattern is great because it comes in 12 different sizes and goes up to a 60.5 inch bust. So we love to see a pattern whose size range goes up past 60. I actually ended up knitting the size 5, which is larger than I typically would have, but my gauge was coming out small. So I was knitting this last year from about mid-February to early June. So it's been almost exactly a year since I finished it. And in that time I've worn it 27 times, which that feels pretty good. That's like more than every other week. And considering that I don't think I wore it in like the dead of summer, even better. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the cost per wear really depends on how generous we're being to me about my past yarn buying failings, because this is a sweater for which I bought, I think, like an entire sweater quantities yarn that did not end up actually in the sweater. I initially bought a different navy blue online that proved to not really seem navy blue to me at all, so I really didn't like the color. And I also bought way more of the red than I needed because I was trying to order it from my local yarn store, but because it was a color they don't stock, they want you to buy at least a certain number of balls in order for them to place the order, so they only have to sell off so many others because they have to buy in a minimum number. It was a whole thing. So I ended up with way more red than I needed and the entire sweater's worth of blue that I no longer wanted to use. So I then had to buy all other yarn. It was a whole thing. So if we're only counting yarn that actually went into the actual sweater, my cost for the project was $222.50 Canadian. Now divide that between my 27 wears and we're down to $8.24, which it seems like I'm gonna wear this sweater a fair bit in the future. So that feels like a number that can steadily work its way down over time and it'll end up somewhere good. Now, if we count all of the yarn I purchased for this project, because let's be real, all of this yarn, even if some of it has ended up in other projects already, but these were all purchased in pursuit of this sweater. Like when that money left my bank account, that's why it was leaving. And I can't really pretend that's not the case. So if we do the math based on those numbers, they're scarier. In that case, my total project cost was $382.95, which that is a terrible number. And that makes our cost per wear $14.18, which, if my ideal goal is that all of my clothes will end up being under $1 cost per wear, 27 wears a year feels like a lot. That's going to take decades. Oh my God. So I love this sweater. I'm very happy I own this sweater. The math will never support this sweater, and that's just gonna have to be okay. He's now out of frame, but he is still here beside me, which is appropriate because today, the first thing that I actually have to show you is a finished object, and it is my dog walking gloves. So if you've been following the saga of my dog walking gloves, you'll know last week I had a bit of an issue, but they are finally complete. So my dog walking gloves were a bit of a self-improvised project, but using an existing pattern as a starting point. So This part is basically the bridge arm warmer by Kukiko Inoue. Now I did modify this a little bit. I knit the main part of the hand to be a little bit longer than it's written in the pattern. I also knit the thumb a little bit longer than written in the pattern. I basically wanted it to cover as much of my hand as possible while still giving the flexibility of a fingerless glove. But I also knit the wrist part a little bit shorter just to accommodate the amount of yarn that I had. But after that, I knit these weird little finger covers that I just made up because I wanted a pair of gloves that I could wear while walking my dog Copper, where I would still have index finger and thumb free to dispense food when we're in like a training mode. And they're done. So let me put them on and show you our finished, strange little creations. So if you missed this before, the concept of this is sort of modeled on the idea of a trigger finger glove, which would actually have this be its own like separate covered finger that is removed from these covered fingers. And I basically just combined that idea with the idea of a fingerless glove so that when I remove that, I could just have a pair of fingerless gloves that are not like weird Martian hands and I could use at other times when I'm not walking Copper. And I also don't need full hand warmth. But when I am walking Copper and it's a really cold day, I can pop on this piece and now I get a little bit of extra warmth, but I can still get the good treats. Copper, come! Hi. Good, Baggy. Hi. Middle. Good. Sit. So this one I have just popping on and off, but this one you'll see is actually attached because I ended up installing snaps. I decided that snaps would be a good idea just to help make sure that this part doesn't kind of wiggle up and pop off as I'm wearing them, as my hand is like flexing, because there's nothing really holding it there. So I just found these snaps that I already had in just the like basic sewing kit that I got from the dollar store like 10 years ago that I've kept just in case. So I sewed the like pointy part onto the little finger cover and the more flat part is on the actual fingerless glove part. So this way, when I'm just wearing these as fingerless gloves, I don't really feel this because it's not sticking out, so it doesn't bug me. But when I want to attach them, I can just snap them together and now they're gonna stay together. And I also think that that's helpful just for storage so that like when I put these away during the warmer months, I won't be like, where's the finger cover in October, the first time I'm trying to use them, and it's like fallen like down a corner of the bin of like the winter stuff and it's just like entered this abyss, nowhere to be found again. So this way they can be stored together and we won't have that problem. Okay, so what did I do about the crisis last week? So last week I was having this problem where I had knit the first one and the wrist part was longer than it strictly needed to be. It was still actually a bit shorter than the pattern and I liked how it looked, but it turned out that I just did not have enough yarn to do that length on both of them. And I was like, okay, that's fine because I don't need that much length. So let me just go back and do a little bit of surgery. We'll just like cut off the bottom 2 inches. They are knit from the bottom up with a tubular cast on, so it wasn't just a matter of unraveling. I had to actually make a cut and then like unpick. And before I did that, I had attempted to put in a lifeline, but knowing that it's tricky to put in a lifeline on ribbing, so I just picked up the knits on one side. And then I did try to flip it inside out and pick up the knits on the inside, which would then be the pearls on the right side, because I'd heard that that's a good way to do a lifeline and ribbing. But I was finding that when I was doing that, I just could not like, I don't know, it just was not making sense. I could not like identify the right thing to pick up. It just wasn't going well for me. But I was like, okay, this is what, like 36 stitches all around. Like it's not a lot of stitches. It's really big wool. It's pretty sticky wool. It's not like these stitches are just gonna like drop like they're falling down Niagara Falls. Like it's fine. I'll just have the knits on a lifeline and I can like rescue the pearls. And so I did that. I put in the lifeline on just the knits. And then afterward I was trying to pick up the pearl stitches and I was like, where are they? Like I still don't even know how to explain what happened because I don't know what happened. I just know that only half the number of stitches were on my needle that there had been before. And they were all the knit stitches, but also there didn't seem to be any like dropped stitches. I could not figure out where the pearl stitches were. So in my last video, I was asking like, do you have any idea what's going on? And I got a handful of different suggestions, but none of them I could make sense of in relation to what I was looking at. One of the recommendations that I got was just try to drop the purl stitches down so that you would find them, but I think that actually wasn't possible because I was going the direction opposite from how they were knit, because they were knit bottom up and I was trying to pull from the bottom, like stitches would fall from the top. So I just nothing was happening when I tried to do that. And the suggestion that I got that I think is probably most likely what might have worked was just to keep unpicking another row so that I could sort of eventually just find those other stitches eventually if I just kept unpicking. But I was reluctant to do that because if I unpicked any further, it would then be shorter than the second one that I had already knit to a certain length. And so if I then wanted them to be the same length, I would then have the problem where if I try to knit back the other direction, your stitches end up being offset by half of a stitch. And because this is ribbing, you would see that. You would see all the stripes kind of go all of a sudden. And I knew that I wouldn't like that. So I didn't really want to do that. So I was like, what else can I do? But just looking at the different recommendations that I got, it just sort of got different gears turning in my brain than had been the last time I was thinking about this. And what I actually came up with and ended up doing was I basically just started picking up stitches. So in between every knit stitch I now had on my needle, I just like lifted the leg of the purl column so that I could then use that as my purl stitch. Now, when I did that, when I used that just picked up leg of the purl column as a purl stitch when I was doing my tubular cast off, it did basically leave a little hole at the top of the purl column right below the bind off edge, almost like a little yarn over. That's kind of what it looked like, but it wasn't a big hole. So I felt like, you know what, I feel like this is actually okay. So what I actually ended up doing was just leaving a really long end on my yarn so that I could kind of weave that thread all the way around, sort of filling in that gap. And I mean, I feel like it worked pretty well. So this is the one that I had to do my kind of makeshift finishing on, compared to this is the tubular cast on. So this is it done as it's actually written in the pattern. And then this is it done with my improvising. So it's definitely not quite as tidy. It also has a little bit more of a flare to it, but not by a huge amount. And also this is the part that goes inside of my sleeve. So I feel like it's not really the end of the world. So I'm happy enough with how that turned out. And I think that when the weather gets cold again, I will be extra happy with how they turned out because I will actually get to use them. So like I said, this part I did just improvise. I just cast on some stitches at the bottom, knit up, and then was just decreasing to just try to follow the shape of these fingers. And when I did the first one, I just wrote down what I did so that I could just copy it exactly on the second one. But if you're interested in making just this part, the good news is that the bridge arm warmers are a free pattern, so that's a nice bonus. Now I knit this out of the yarn that I picked up on my Venice trip from the local yarn shop in Venice called Lilabella. It is the Cessia Ulisse yarn, which is 100% wool, and it's this dark charcoaly color with these light flecks sort of spun into it for this really cute kind of rustic variation in the yarn. And these are just going to be so warm and I'm very excited. Now I lost my receipt for this yarn somewhere in my travels. I think it cost me about $40. So since the pattern was free, that means that my total cost for this project was $40 Canadian or like about $30 US. So we're currently at an infinite cost per wear because I've not actually worn these in real life at all, considering that it's now June. So these will not probably see the light of day again until like maybe October, but hopefully a year from now, these will have a really, really good cost per wear because I'm hoping that I will want to wear these basically all winter long. So stay tuned. I also have been thinking this week, I think a couple of my knitting podcasts that I watched this week both mentioned the idea of tubular bind offs, sewn bind offs, Italian sewn bind offs. What is the difference between these things? And I think someone was saying that like a tubular bind off involves setup rows. And I'm very confused because anytime that I have done what I think is a tubular bind off, I have followed a tutorial from Very Pink Knits, which I watch her tutorial videos all the time. And it's called the tubular bind off and there are no setup rows. And now I'm like, is it not actually a tubular bind off? Is an Italian sewn bind off the one with the setup rows? I don't know. I've never done setup rows. I think the setup rows are supposed to be double knitting. I've never done this. And now I'm very confused about what is what as far as cast off methods that make it look like the stitches continue around the edge is what I'm gonna call them, because I now don't wanna call it a tubular bind off or a sewn bind off, or I don't know. So if you actually know which one is which and what all of these things mean, please let me know, because I thought I knew what a tubular bind off was and now I'm questioning everything. All right, so let's talk whips. So we have the same No Frills cardigan that I have been knitting since January. But I actually have an update for you today that is something other than I knit a few more inches. So last time I tried this on and I was like, I feel like it's not getting any closer to the floor. I feel like I keep knitting and it just forever needs to be knit longer. And so I kept knitting this week with that kind of in mind. And then the other day I was like, I should probably check the pattern just to see exactly how long the ribbing is at the bottom so that I know how much short of the total final length that I want it to be. I need to stop doing stockinette and switch to ribbing, right? Makes sense. So I did that and was shocked to find that there's supposed to be 3.5 inches of ribbing at the bottom, which I don't know, is just a lot more ribbing than I was assuming in my head that there would be. I think maybe I just thought that it would be like the same as the button band, that it would just be like about 1 inch. But in fact, it's not matching that, it's matching what's on the sleeve, which is 3.5 inches. And I mean, you know, that makes sense. I just wasn't thinking about that. So when I then tried it on to try to figure out, okay, how much further do I have to knit until I start my 3.5 inches of ribbing? I went, oh, that might be too much. I might actually have knit this too far. And so I think that if when that happened, I had actually just at that moment started knitting ribbing, it might have been fine. It might have turned out to be the perfect length, but it might have also over time gotten too long. And I just don't know. I just don't know how much this is gonna grow over time just from the sagging under its own weight. And I really don't want to have spent 6 months on this cardigan to end up with a cardigan that is unwearable until I pick off the edge and rip inches off of it and re-knit ribbing. And I just don't want to do that. And I was feeling like, you know what, I actually quite like the length that it's at right now, plus maybe a tiny bit more. But what that means is that I actually had to rip back 2 inches of my cardigan, which like, that's just so many hours going to 2 inches on this knit flat stockinette cardigan. So, you know, that was a little sad. And I spent like an hour trying to like pick up all the right legs of all the right stitches to like put in my lifeline and rip back. And so I got it all sorted out. It's all done now. And we actually have the very beginnings of some ribbing. That's the very start of the ribbed edge. There's like a few rows of ribbed stitches. So that's exciting. I'm actually like on the bottom part now. I'm not just knitting stockinette into infinity anymore. We've actually progressed. So that's exciting. And I've also measured out where my pockets are going to be. So I haven't actually done any of the knitting on the pockets, but I was looking at the pattern to see where it recommends you position the pockets. And I don't know. I tried marking out where the pattern suggests that the pockets go in terms of height. And I felt like a T-Rex imagining putting my arms in those pockets. Like it felt like they were like in my armpit. And I was like, I don't think this is gonna cut it for me. So I ended up kind of figuring out, okay, where do I feel like they should actually be height-wise? And it was twice as far down from the armhole as the pattern recommends. I'm like, that seems like a lot. Like maybe that's too dramatic of a change to make. Like maybe I'm just like gauging something wrong. I should check this against like another sweater that I have to make sure that this makes sense. But in fact, when I just pulled out the like store-bought long cardigan that I have with pockets, its pockets are basically exactly where I positioned the pockets on this cardigan. So I must just have way longer arms than petite knit. I mean, she is, I think, like a petite person, so I guess that tracks. But like twice as long? I don't know. That seems like a lot, but I think that's where my pockets need to go. All right, so let's do a try on, shall we? Okay, so it turns out that I actually stopped this in the middle of a row, which means that I can't try it on until I finish knitting this row. So while I finish knitting this row, let's just go over some pattern stats, shall we? So this, like I said, is the No Frills Cardigan by Petite Knit. I'm knitting this in the size extra small. The pattern cost 49 Danish kroner, or about $9 Canadian. And I'm knitting it out of the Knitting for Olive Merino in the color mustard. And I've paired that with the We Are Knitters Touch Me mohair, also in the color mustard. And it's giving this super nice, fun, sunny yellow color. I'm really excited about it. I spent so much time trying to find the right combination of colors, especially the mohair. It was hard to find a mohair that wasn't super sort of like lemony yellow or that wasn't super kind of browny mustard. It was kind of hard to find the one that was like the right in between. That was just sort of a very like saturated mustardy yellow color, and We Are Knitters is what came through for me in the end. Now I am seeing, as I'm getting closer to the end of this project, I have so much more yarn than I need to have, but considering I normally end up with way less yarn than I need to have, I will take it. So currently in all, I spent about $230 Canadian on yarn, or about 175 US, which I mean, is a lot, and also is proving to me more than I actually needed to. But honestly, like, I mean, we heard from this Google sweater, I've spent way more than that on much smaller garments. So considering how enormous this cardigan is, you know, I actually feel like that could have been a lot worse. Now I am knitting this on 4.5mm needles instead of 4mm as written in the pattern, so that I would get gauge. And the way that this cardigan is knit, if you haven't seen all of my progress, is you sort of start from the very top and you knit it down as a raglan. And so I've just been like, basically once I finished the sleeves, I have just been knitting body for months. I've just been back and forth, flat stockinette forever, and it's very novel to now be on this ribbing that I'm now trying to finish this row of so that I can show you, and we can also chat about pocket positioning. One of the nice things about this pattern is that the button band is knit simultaneously. So now that I'm almost done, I am not about to have to pick up 3,000 stitches around the perimeter, which I'm very, very happy about because I don't like picking up stitches in general. And I really don't think I would cope well with having to pick up, you know, from the very bottom edge all the way up around the neck and then all the way back down a cardigan that goes to the floor. You know, I think that I would have a bad time with that. So very grateful to the design of this pattern for not making me do that. I've also been knitting this since January 5th. That's the date that I cast on. So today is June 1st, which means that we are 5 entire months in. Now, I was kind of thinking about a month ago, oh, I think I'm like about a month away from finishing, and here we are, and I'm not finished. I'm on the ribbing, but I still have the pockets to do, and like ribbing takes longer than just stockinette. So I don't know, it's very possible that this will end up taking me the rest of the month to finish. I hope not though. It would be nice if I could finish this a little bit sooner, but the pockets, I don't know, it just, there's something scary about afterthought pockets, and I say something as if it's vague. It's not vague. The scary part is that you snip the yarn. The scary part is that you cut your knitting and you unpick part of a row. And I mean, as someone who has never done steeking or anything like that, I don't know, the idea of cutting, like I guess I've cut to do surgery before, which, and like that is a bit stressful, but I don't know, this is extra. And I guess part of the thing is that with surgery, typically you've like put in a lifeline and so it's fine. And I don't know, just the idea of cutting into these pockets is stressful. So I definitely will want to do it on a day where I feel like I have very adequate like mental capacity for it. I don't want to feel rushed. I don't want to be doing it probably in like multiple sittings. So yeah, if we'll see if I have a chance to do that next weekend, I guess is probably the best bet, but I don't know, we'll see if I finish these before July 5th. If I do, we will have beat my 6-month estimate for this project. Okay, let's try it on. What is even going on here? What are you? What are you attached to? This mohair is not even part of this project right now. I like cut this off because there was a tangle, and now it's somehow like retangled itself. Okay, there we go. You're not involved, go away. Can I get all of it in frame? Okay, I actually have to tip the camera to get it all in. Okay, here we go. So, part of what I was finding when I was trying it on before to measure is that just the way that it sits, the front edge tends to kind of sit a bit lower than the back edge. It just kind of naturally droops that way, which makes sense, but also means I can't just base the length off of where the back of it hits. So that's really why I decided to rip back, because I was getting worried that the front corners were gonna start dragging and then they would get all like ratty and start unraveling and it would be a really bad time. So I decided it was time to start ribbing, and I feel like this is a good spot. So I mean, I've only got like maybe a 1/4 inch of ribbing at this point. So I basically have 3 to 3¼ inches of ribbing left to add. So I think that once that's there, I think this is going to be the perfect length. I'm very excited. I've marked out my pocket positioning with these little stitch markers. This is the front edge and the back edge of the pocket, and this is the top edge. So this will be the opening, and then the pocket is supposed to be about 6 inches deep. So if I put my hand in there, I've still got kind of a natural bend to my arm. It's not like I'm fully extending to reach down in there, and I feel like that's a comfortable spot. Like when I measured out where the pattern was saying to put them, it was literally like here, and like I just don't feel like I really want a pocket there. I don't know if this is just a difference in preferred pocket placement, or if it's actually like that significant of a difference in just like body proportion. Because to me, I'm like, I feel like a T-Rex right now. Like I don't want to be going in a pocket like that. I don't want to feel like I'm like flexing my back muscles to like reach into my pocket. So I think that will be a much more comfortable height. So fingers crossed that is true, because this is the other scary part about afterthought pockets. Like I'm making a cut, like I really need to be pretty confident about where those pockets go. So I do think though that like with the bend in my arm that's still there when I put my hand in a pocket here, like even if it ends up sagging down several inches, like I can still reach that without like, you know, reaching. So I think that's the right spot. I hope that's the right spot. We're gonna go on the assumption that it's the right spot. So yeah, that is my No Frills cardigan, and next video will either be and we're still doing ribbing and still need to do pockets, or it'll be a finished object. And at this point, I genuinely cannot tell you which one it will be. Place your bets now. Okay, and now I have a new cast on to share. This is related to what I was talking about in my last video, and maybe you can tell as I pull this out what's going on. So a couple weeks ago now, I was at Knit City Toronto, which is a yarn festival event downtown, and it was so much fun. And I picked up this beautiful yarn from the Wandering Flock. So this is an 80% Super Kid Mohair, 20% silk base in the color Cosmic Tie-Dye. And it is glorious. Look at it. It's so fuzzy. The colors are so pretty. I love it. So I picked up 2 skeins of it. And in my last video, I was debating between a couple of different patterns, but I have settled on knitting the Cloudbow. And this is the beginning of my Cloudbow. So the way this top is constructed is kind of interesting, because you actually just start by knitting 2 identical rectangles. And if this seems too small to be the front or back of a top, that's because it is. But again, this construction is interesting. So it's basically you have a front panel, and then I'm actually going to be picking up stitches along the side here to start knitting this way in a way that somehow does both like the side of the top. So you have a whole separate panel for your side and the sleeve. And then I think everything gets connected, and then you pick up all the way around the bottom, I think, to knit the peplum in the round. I think that's what's going on. But part of what I like about this pattern is that I just don't have to worry about that right now. I can just knit rectangles, and it's very easy to get started, and it's gonna turn into something. Now, will I later feel like I'm really paying for that by like suffering through the construction phase, because I haven't had a garment with much of a construction phase in like a while, and I don't like it usually. So I might regret that later, but for now I'm having a great time, because as you can see, I've already knit one of the 2 panels, because guess what? When you're knitting lace weight on 6.5mm needles, those are big needles, and it knits up really fast. So it's this really pretty, very open fabric that I think really shows off the variegation in this yarn so nicely. So I've done that one entire panel, and I'm also a decent way into the second one. So I think I'm maybe like roughly halfway done. So that feels honestly like, after working on this cardigan for so many months, like just the idea of having like completed an entire something, like it's not a garment, but it's an entire piece of the garment. It has been cast on and it has been bound off, and that feels really nice. And it just feels like it's knitting up so quickly, because like if I sit down with that cardigan and knit for an hour, it doesn't look any different. Like between the fact that the rows are long enough that like in an hour I might do like maybe 4, maybe 5 rows. So it's like I've added like this much length to it, and that's in the scheme of a garment that's so long that this is like nothing. That's like 0.1%. So to instead sit down for an hour, and like I think this is maybe 2 hours. So like to knit for an hour and feel like, oh, I actually did like a fifth of the total amount I need to knit for this whole thing feels really nice. So far I'm a really big fan of working on this. It was a little bit tricky just getting the panels started, just the combination of the huge needles and the tiny yarn. Just trying to knit like that very first row into the cast on is like quite fiddly, and then before you really have the sort of like tail of fabric coming down here, it just really wants to like twist all around the needles, and so there's a lot of like, oh no, that stitch is kind of twisting around, you need to kind of like pull it back. So it was definitely a little bit fiddly to get started. I was definitely a little bit like, oh god, this is going to be really terrible to work on. But it very quickly got so much easier. Like it was maybe like 2 rows were not super fun, and then after that it's been so easy. It's a very, very different like tactile experience than working on the cardigan. Like it just feels so different on the hands in a way that is kind of a nice like switch. Now that I'm both used to it and the cardigan, to go back and forth between them is kind of a nice change of pace. But at first it felt so weird. I was like, this is not what fabric's supposed to feel like. This is not what yarn's supposed to feel like. This is not what needles are supposed to feel like. It was definitely a big thing to adapt to, and like more noticeably so than when I was going back and forth between the cardigan and the dog walking gloves. Maybe just because I've knit things like those gloves before, like I'm not a stranger to knitting with really chunky yarn, but this is new to me, like knitting something this lightweight in general. Like I've never knit lace weight on its own, and then pairing that with a thick needle, it's a very particular combo, and it was very new to me. But I am really liking how this is turning out, and I'm excited. I think this is going to be just like such a good, like fun summer layer, and I'm hoping that this won't take me too long to knit up. I mean, at this rate it's not bad, and maybe I'll get to wear it for like my birthday or something. My birthday's Labor Day weekend, so that would be good. All right, so to go over the project stats, this is the Cloudbow by Reed Keys, and now notably this comes in both a top version and a dress version, so I'm knitting the top. Now this pattern is really solid on the size inclusivity front. It goes up to between a 62 or a 66 inch bust, just depending on how much of the recommended range of positive ease you want to have. And I decided to knit the size 3, which I did just based off of looking at one of the models in the pattern photos and just kind of comparing her measurements to mine. And now notably I did not knit a gauge swatch for this. I was like, I don't know, it's like, it's supposed to be loose anyway, how much can it really vary? And I found that I was kind of debating between knitting the size 2 and the size 3, but those both start out the same in the pattern. So I was like, well, why don't I just start knitting as if for a size 2 or 3? And by the time I have to decide which one I'm knitting, I will have knit a big enough thing of this that it can function as its own gauge swatch. So then I can decide what I want to do. So now I have found that, as usual, my gauge is coming up small. I don't know why. I thought that it like maybe wouldn't be as much of a thing here. Like somehow I thought that just like maybe because of the vast discrepancy between the weight of the yarn and the needle size, that something about that would like camouflage like differences in tension. That's not the case. I'm knitting it tight as usual. So because of that, I will be knitting a size 3 rather than a size 2, but I'm hoping that it will land me somewhere closer to the intended measurements of the size 2. Now, in terms of the cost of the pattern, this was a pricier one because this pattern is actually from Pom Pom Quarterly. So I had to buy a digital copy of the whole magazine in order to get this. And the price of that is 11 Great British pounds, which converted out to 1942 Canadian. So like at least twice as much as I'm used to patterns costing, but I really liked this top. I really wanted to knit it. And I do think there's a decent enough chance that I might end up knitting something else out of this book as well. I was looking at the Plumeria top. It looks really cute. I'm not sure that I would want the sort of Peter Pan color on it. I think that those are so cute, but they're just not for me. They're just a bit too like frilly for my taste, but I love how the rest of it looks. So I think I might consider just modifying that one into like a regular crew neck. And it's possible that that might be something that I might do with the leftover mohair that I'm gonna have from the cardigan, because I will definitely have enough of it. So that's kind of like percolating in the back of my brain, that maybe the cost of this pattern book will get a little bit less terrible over time, but for now it's a pricey one. As for the cost of the yarn, so like I said, I bought 2 skeins of this. These skeins retail for $48 Canadian, so with tax that came out to $108.48. And because I got these at Knit City, I didn't have to pay shipping, which is a fun thing to get to escape when buying from an indie dyer. Now, I did have to pay money to get into the event, which is 20 bucks, and like probably similar to what shipping would cost. So in that way, did I save money? No, but if every time that I pay for shipping, I was instead actually paying to get to go like look at beautiful yarn for like a couple hours, I would feel like that was money better spent. So it evens out. So now between the cost of the yarn and the cost of the pattern, that brings my total project cost to $127.90 Canadian, which is about $94 US. All right, so now to branch out from knitting into the more general sort of creative pursuit category, let's talk books. So this week I have a finished object of a book, but I do not have a finished object of a book because I finished reading Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, which means that I returned it to its owner, so I cannot like hold it up for you. But this book was such an interesting, just like look into a world that I knew absolutely nothing about. Like I am not like a foodie person. I am not like a watching the Food Network kind of person. I'm very clueless as to the world of like celebrity chefs, well-known restaurants, like all of these things. I know like absolutely nothing. So to read a whole book that was sort of the like behind the scenes of like what it's like to work in a kitchen, very interesting, because I really don't think that I would have guessed how like brutal it seems in a way where like I don't think I would last one day in a kitchen. It sounds awful. I'm not tough enough for that. I fear for people who are tough enough for that, because like who hurt you? What made you have to be this resilient? It sounds rough, but it was so interesting to get this look into it because I don't know, I kind of like, maybe it's just like the nerd in me that thinks this. And when I say the nerd in me, I mean like all of me, because everything in me is a nerd. I think that like genuinely anything is interesting when you like get far enough into it that you like start to understand like the details and the nuance. As an example, like knitting. Like people who are not knitters are so shocked when I tell them that there's like drama and controversy in the knitting world, because if you're not a knitter, if you're not involved in like the online knitting world, that sounds wild. Like what could people possibly be like arguing about and riled up about in knitting? And like if you're here, like you probably know, there's stuff, but like you have to be in it to get that. And I feel like this book was kind of me getting a little bit like into that with the food world, the cooking world, the restaurant world. And it was just really interesting because I knew none of it. And Anthony Bourdain is just a very like entertaining writer. He's very brash, he's very hyperbolic. Nothing is described in like boring plain terms. So while I would argue it can always be interesting to learn enough detail about whatever topic, it definitely helps when you have someone compelling guiding you into it. So he was definitely that. So just as an example from this, I took down one quote of the book that I'm gonna read just to give you like a sense of the voice if you're unfamiliar. "To sign on Adam to your crew is to buy for a time the best bread I've ever tasted. It ensures that your customer, when examining their bread baskets, will exclaim, 'Where did you get this bread? And where can I buy this bread?' It also means that your life will be a waking nightmare, that every corner of your walk-ins and kitchen shelving will likely contain sinister-looking and foul-smelling science experiments. Rotting grapes, fermenting red peppers, soggy buckets of mushroom trimmings, the gills and stems decomposing into noxious black sludge, all of them destined for the sourdough starter," this is the context you're missing, "or one of her many offspring, smaller batches of starter that have been flavored with or started by one of these primordial oozes. Hiring Adam was always a trade-off. With God or with Satan, I don't know." So that's a voice I was happy to hang out with for a while. It was a good time. Now, since I finished that, as far as reading whips, I'm currently reading Attached at the Hip by Christine Riccio, which I was talking about last week as a new acquisition. I'm only like 30 pages into this. I just started, but I just am so excited for my Survivor Bachelor crossover book. It's just 30 pages in, it's already fun, and I'm just looking forward to digging into this more. So far, it is everything I've been promised, and I'm here for it. And since I can't talk about books without talking about a book that I've acquired, here's this week's. I did not realize that Kevin Kwan had a new book coming out. If you're not aware, Kevin Kwan is the author of the Crazy Rich Asians series, which I absolutely love. He also put out a book in between that series and this book called Sex and Vanity a few years ago, which I did read, but I don't like remember anything about. But don't take that as a bad review, because I remember extremely little about most books I read, and I think that I honestly only remember much about Crazy Rich Asians because it was turned into a movie, so I now like have that visual seared into my brain, which really helps. Like I do remember enjoying Sex and Vanity, I just remember nothing about it. But I do know that I really enjoy his writing. I find that the thing he does really, really well is telling a story that's on a broad scope. Like there's a lot of different characters involved. There's a lot of different stuff going on, and like actually keeps me like involved and actually feeling like I'm following what's going on, because I tend to have a really hard time with books like that. Like this is part of why I love to read YA. You're following one person and you're following them so closely, and everything else is just kind of peripheral. So for him to write stories that are on such a broad scale and for me to actually stay invested and following, like I feel like that's a real testament to his writing. And it's always fun to read something that is different from what you usually read, but executed in a way that still works for you, which is exactly what his writing is for me. So I'm really excited to get into this one soon. It sounds like it's going to be a really good summer read. The plot makes it sound like it shares a lot of themes with his other books, a lot of sort of like familial expectations and like class expectations. So just to read you just a little like tagline. A forbidden affair erupts dramatically amid a decadent Hawaiian wedding in this hilarious, sophisticated, and thrillingly plotted story of love, money, murder, and sex. Well, the murder is new. I don't think we've had murder in his books before. And the lies we tell about them all. So I just feel like that's gonna be a really good cottage book, and I'm excited about it. Okay, and outside of reading, I've mentioned on this channel a few times that I like to scrapbook, but it is yet to actually make it onto the channel because I just hadn't done any scrapbooking since I started my channel, but that's no longer true. So honestly, I think that this renewed scrapbook kick was in part prompted by the fact that I bought some new scrapbook organizing stuff. So I was at IKEA recently. Who doesn't love IKEA? And I spotted this storage cart. Now, isn't it so weird and so delightful? And I was like, I need this immediately. And I genuinely have been thinking that I need to get more storage for my craft room. I just find that when I'm scrapbooking, I just need so much surface area. So I have this like big tabletop surface that actually used to be a kitchen island in my last place that has now become my scrapbooking table. And it's like quite huge, but it's just covered. I don't know, I need space to lay stuff out. A page itself in the scrapbook is 12 by 12 inches, and I'm always designing in spreads. So we're now talking 24 inches wide by 12 inches tall. And I need space for all of my tools, my paper cutters. I need to like be able to lay stuff out around it. I need to have other pages that I'm like thinking about laying out around and spread out. I need surface area. I need more shelving. So I saw this cart. And I was like, you know where that cart would be really cute? It's in my craft room. So this is the Tessamans storage unit. It cost $129 Canadian. And look how cute it is in my craft room. I'm a big fan. And this cart is also ideal because it's about 16 inches square, which means that it fits 12 by 12 scrapbook paper, no problem, which is notable because I feel like a lot of things are just like slightly too small to fit scrapbook stuff. Like scrapbooks are just like slightly too big for most things. So this one's great because in that top pink section, I store pages that I've finished but just haven't made it into the album yet. And then I can use the lower sections for boxes where I collect the scraps that I'm later going to like organize into different spreads and put in the book. But I thought maybe I would show you some of my scrapbook pages because why not? So what I've been working on scrapbooking is a trip to Disneyland last fall that I took with my sister. Now, as you may have guessed from my Baymax mug, from previously featured on the channel Chip mug, from I don't know, probably other things. I'm a Disney fan, and so is my sister. And we've been to Disney World together a few times, but this is our first time going to Disneyland, and it was a lot of fun, and it had to go in the scrapbook. I mean, honestly, this makes it sound like only like significant things like trips make it into my scrapbook. This is not true. This is not at all representative. Like, a good dinner that I had goes into the scrapbook. The bar for entry is not as high as this is gonna make it seem, but so here is one of the spreads that I did for this trip. Oh, can I get it all? So I do design them in spreads because I kind of want them to look like nice and coordinated in the book, but so that you can see them a little bit better. I like to keep things like brochures, like buttons. I like anything that I can stick in my scrapbook. I also picked up this illustrated postcard from the art shop so that I could put it on a spread. I just like collecting things that can go in my scrapbook. It makes me happy. I've really started pushing the bounds of what can be considered two-dimensional enough because that is a pair of Mickey ears that I broke trying to shove them in my bag before we went on a ride so that I wouldn't lose them on the ride. And instead I lost them by breaking them, shoving them in my bag to go on the ride. So these are definitely going to fatten up the scrapbook a little bit. But we like a chunky scrapbook. So here is the last of the spreads that I did for this Disney trip. We have another postcard from the art gallery in the middle, which this one's appropriate because it has Madame Mim, the villain from The Sword in the Stone. And this is all about the Oogie Boogie Bash, which is the Halloween party at Disneyland, and all the villains are out and about, and it was just very appropriate. Oh, and there's another postcard that I bought. There's a lot of cute postcards to buy, okay? So that's kind of what my scrapbook spreads generally look like. And then I do put them in an album later, but I don't tend to scrapbook in the order that I'm going to want them to appear in the book, especially because I'm often doing it kind of throughout the year as the year's going, and some things are going to be more contained, like this trip is going to be these pages, but then I'll also do pages that are just like all of the best restaurant meals that I went out to that year, and so it's not strictly chronological. So I tend to keep the pages out of the album, and then just when I'm done the entire year, then I will go through and figure out the actual order I want to display them in and then they go in the book. All right, so that's everything. That's all I've got for you today. So thank you so much for watching, especially if you stuck it out through all the non-knitting stuff to the very, very end. So thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to be here next time, please consider subscribing if you're not already. If you are, you're my favorite, and I'll see you next time. Bye.